Welcome along to the first episode of the Sports 2000 podcast series for 2022. I'm Sue Stockdale, your host for this series that takes you behind the scenes of this British sports car prototype series, giving drivers the chance to compete at some of the UK's finest circuits every year. During the winter, one of the off-season car preparation activities for many drivers is to check the safety equipment in their car, such as the fire extinguisher system and seat harnesses. And my guest today knows all about these things. Jim Morris is Managing Director at Lifeline Fire and Safety Systems, a specialist motorsport fire suppression and safety company, working also in the defence sector and industrial applications. Jim also races himself, competing at Goodwood, recently in his dad's original Volkswagen Golf GTI from the 1981-82 season. So we're going to have lots to talk about in this conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Jim. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Thank you very much for having me today.
I'm really interested to speak to you today because I know that safety is a really important part of what makes drivers feel comfortable to compete in competitions. And we're going to come on to your particular interest in that in the conversation today. Maybe you can tell us about how you first got interested in cars and racing.
Well, I don't think I really had an option, to be honest. So I think I grew up around the sport. From my earliest, days as a toddler. Really, my dad raced initially locally at Oulton Park in saloon car races, and then did a little bit of clubman's racing, but primarily focused on saloon cars. And then he travelled up and down the country. We travelled as a family every weekend, going to initially one make races, which was things like Debenhams Escorts and Penthouse Escorts, and then as he developed as a driver, it then turned into the British Saloon Car Championship, as it was known there in the late 70s, primarily with the Volkswagen brand. And Dad raced in the British Saloon Car Championship through, I suppose, late 70s, early 80s into the mid-80s, and then a little bit of production saloons and Group N saloons, another foray back into the British Saloon Car Championship, and then retired. I'd started racing a little bit then in go-karts at the age of 15, because at that time you couldn't start racing karts until you were 13, 14. There were no cadets or bambinos as there are now. And then in the early 90s, I saved up my pennies and bought a production saloon car Volkswagen Golf Mark II, which I raced in the Firestone production car series for 3 or 4 years. But that was sort of my transition into my professional career and Lifeline. So the racing really had to take a backseat then.
As you were spectating there, going along to these races with your dad, what were you picking up and noticing?
I suppose, like all little boys and young men, we wanted to be a racing driver. And that's what I wanted to be. And at one point, I suppose late 80s, early 90s, I believe that's what I was going to do. I had my sights set on, either being a touring car driver, or then I think the dream was to be a German touring car driver. Watching those cars at Donington Park were just spectacular. And I was racing in production saloons then, and that was very aspirational. As we all know, that's a dream, really. It's you either got to have lots and lots of money to do it, or you've got to work a way of earning a living within the sport. And that's what I did in sort of 93, 94, realised that I could actually earn a living with my background, which was in engineering and industrial design, to manufacture and make products. And that's how it really started.
So the nearest thing you could get to driving in motorsport was being involved in the industry with your business.
Correct,
and setting up Lifeline.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I graduated from Polytechnic from Coventry, Lanchester, which is just down the road from here, with a degree. But my third year, which was the sandwich course, I spent with a company called SPA Design, and I was involved in instrumentation, dampers, some fabricated parts, and fire extinguishing systems, that's got a bit of a story to it, and I'll come to that later. But I kind of fell into that. It really wasn't the sort of career path that I set out on.
So in terms of then seeing that you could start up a business and be focused on those fire extinguisher systems, how did that come about then?
Well, it came about really my days at SPA. So, as I said, we were doing a lot of work with dampers for Penske and some instrumentation and other fabricated SPA made. They made a lot of parts for Formula One cars, uprights and wishbones, and I was involved in a lot of the sort of drawing and productionizing of those. And we had a telephone call from a lady called Angie Furman, who probably most people will know is Ralph Furman's wife of the Van Diemen empire. And I built a relationship up with Angie and Van Diemen. We made a lot of parts for them. And she had tried to make her own fire extinguishers for her own cars. And she had run into litigation, should we say, with another well-known company. And she literally phoned me up and said, Jim, can you come and look at these parts I've got? And I went down to just over the road from Snetterton to the Van Diemen factory. And she took me into a shed there, and she got piles of bottles and valves and other bits and pieces and something she'd actually infringed patent-wise, and said, can you do something with these? Can you make something of these? And I was able to do that, and we managed to circumnavigate the patent and started productionizing these systems primarily for Angie for the 150 cars they used to make a year. And that's how it grew. And that became really interesting for me because it was working within a set of defined regulations by the FIA and the RAC as it was then. And I quite like that, working within regulations and not trying to exploit the regulations, but make the regulations work for you and make the best possible product, best performing product. And this is where I've always believed that they are safety products and they're safety critical. And obviously people, a huge amount of trust into these products that we manufacture. But I also believe that the safety product doesn't mean that it has to be over-engineered. I think that because of the environment that these products operate in, then we need to be extracting maximum performance from them. Exactly as you work with a race car, it's all about making it lighter, making it better, and eventually that makes it faster.
I'm imagining then it's not the same product that goes into every single race car. No,
not at all. So it depends upon the category of sport. So, the regulations are constantly evolving, particularly at the higher end of the sport. So at what I would term as the professional end of the sport, where manufacturers and constructors are involved, particularly OE constructors, such as BMW or Mercedes or somebody like that. So it's dependent upon the regulations. So there are two current FIA regulations. There's Technical List 52, which is for World Rally cars, for GT3 cars, and will be for the LMP and LMD and LMDH cars for 2022. And then we have Technical List 16, which has been the FIA regulation since probably 1998, which is the regulation now that MS UK are transitioning to, rather than having their own specific regulation, which is what they've always had since I've been involved in this for nearly 30 years.
And what are the implications of that, therefore, for drivers and what systems they use?
I think the reality of it is for the first time in the UK, competitors are going to have to run what we term as an homologated system. So that is a system that has been put through an approved test by the FIA. These approved tests are conducted by British Standards Institute, and we have a series of defined test rigs. So we have a cockpit test, and we have an engine bay test, and there is a test fire. We have certain time parameters and heat parameters that we have to work within. In a nutshell, the extinguisher has to be able to put that fire out, whether it be in the engine bay or the cockpit, within a period of 20 seconds. And it also has to keep that fire out for a further 2 minutes. And this is really to allow assistance to get to a driver or a competitor should they be stuck in the car. So that's that test. That's the test that we've been operating on since 1998.
And for the Sports 2000 drivers or those listening to this podcast, what are the implications then for them?
Well, it depends. So the more modern cars, so a lot of the newer cars will already have the compliance equipment in them. And it's quite an easy check. What you need to do is look at the label of the extinguisher, and it will give you an homologation number. And it normally starts with an EX, and it'll be 019. That list is quite extensive, and that list can be found on the FIA website. If you just Google Technical List 16 FIA, you'll find that list in the FIA bulletins, and that will give you a list of all the approved extinguishers. And this is where it becomes interesting, because there are a lot of people interpret it that I now have to have an extinguisher that's got 10 millimeter tubing in it, or I must have an extinguisher that has 8 nozzles. That is not the case. You must have an extinguishing system that is approved to Technical List 16. Now, those extinguishers contained within Technical List 16, some may have 8 nozzles, some may only have 4. Some may have 8 millimeter tubing, some might have 6 millimeter tubing. Some might be 4.25 litres in capacity, and others might only be 1.5 kilos in capacity. It's not a minimum requirement now, it's an homologated system. And that's the mindset that's got to change, really. It's I need an homologated system, so which is the best system for my particular vehicle? Because then you've got to consider the weight, the actual install of the extinguisher, the maintenance of the extinguisher, and of course the size. Sports 2000 has got effectively what is a dual cockpit to it. I know some of them are on the single cockpit cars, but they're relatively large structures, so it's not that difficult to package an extinguisher into it. But being an incredibly competitive championship, then obviously the competitors are looking for a weight reduction or put the lightest possible extinguisher in, or it might be they want the simplest to install. So it's really about choosing what is best for your requirements. At the end of the day, they all pass the same test. And I can tell you, a foam extinguisher is probably not as efficient as a no-vet gas extinguisher, because foam works in 2 dimensions and gas works in 3 dimensions. But at the end of the day, it's up to the competitor to choose what is best for them.
No, that makes sense. They've got choice as long as they're conforming to the specification.
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
Now, I also know, just thinking back to driving, that you were a spectator at the first ever Sports 2000 race. Is that right?
Yeah, I was at Brands Hatch, and I can't remember the year because I'd only been 10 or 11 years old. But I remember being at Brands Hatch and seeing those cars. I've always loved Sports 2000 cars. They're beautiful looking cars. They always have been, particularly the earlier ones. And the other reason I know that is because when my dad was racing, he was sponsored by a Solihull, a locally based company called Morris Vulcan, who made roller skates and skateboards. They were Europe's biggest manufacturer, just as that fad was really kicking off. And they also sponsored one Mark Thatcher, who raced a Sports 2000.
Wow. So there's some interesting memories there from your childhood.
Yes, yeah.
And I also know you've had a bit of a hero racing experience at Goodwood.
Yeah, well, I'm still a racer, although I'm a little bit older, so I tend to race in more historic racing now. So I've been very lucky to be invited to race at Goodwood on quite a few occasions now. And we've either been raced at the Revival with a Lotus 23B, or more latterly in the members meeting in what they call the Jerry Marshall Trophy. And Jerry Marshall was a sparring partner of my dad's back in the late 70s, early 80s. They have a race at Goodwood which is for what they term as Group 1.5 British saloon cars. This year at the members meeting, which had been delayed unfortunately because of the COVID situation, which was run back in October, they changed the format, which kind of suited us. So they split the grid, as they did back in the day, for the little cars and the big cars. So we're normally racing against Capris and Rovers and Camaros and really big heavy metal stuff. And I'm racing what was my dad's original Golf GTI from the 1981-82 season, which he had some factory support from Volkswagen with. And we managed to win the little car race outright, which was great. That was my intention that weekend. We've always punched a little bit above our weight with the Golf against the Capris and the Rovers, but someone like Goodwood, it's really tough because Goodwood's an incredibly fast circuit. But we have in the past in the 2-driver format, and I have a co-driver in that, a guy by the name of Tom Shepherd, who used to be the other half of John Maguire Racing, that built sort of in the, I suppose, 70s, 80s special saloons, so stilettos, imps, minis, that sort of thing, Lotus Esprit, Skodas, effectively cars that look like Skoda but were effectively a space frame underneath with big engines in and that sort of thing. Goodwood was a phenomenal weekend for us, and we won the little car race, and Tom was in my other car, a VW Sirocco, which is the sister car to the Golf, was 3rd or 4th. And then we went into what they call the final, which was the amalgamation of the little cars and the big cars. So I started middle of the front row with a Pri on one side, and I think it was a Mustang on the other, but unfortunately Little Golf just can't keep up with those cars. But it was great fun and a real privilege to do.
And I don't know if it was in that race or another race, I understand that your car was almost going on 2 wheels at one point.
I know, that was my co-driver, Tom. So Tom Shepherd, who I referred to a few moments ago, Tom, I think the red mist descended a little bit and he made a mistake into turn 1 at Goodwood, and coming back through the pack after he'd spun and got it wrong and ran out of road and perhaps a little bit of talent, and ended up glancing the barriers and looking at the in-car footage. I just don't know how the car did not fall over on its roof. I mean, it actually damaged the driver's door mirror. It went up that high, but it came back down on 2 wheels. So we were fairly lucky. So that's now in the body shop being repaired.
Well, there's the thrills and spills of racing,
yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Just coming back to thinking about your business and the fire extinguishers and going ahead for 2022, does that mean a big change for your business then, for how you're manufacturing because the regulations change?
A little bit. It'll obviously mean there'll be more demand for the UK market. I mean, we've seen this over the last 10 years with markets like France and Germany transitioning, their regulations. So it's not new territory for us. It's just that there will be a higher demand for products. But, We manufacture nearly 20,000 systems a year. I think people think that we manufacture, a couple of hundred a month and that's it. We are a proper manufacturing business. We do have a production line. We have Lifeline employs 32 people, and most of those are production operatives, whether they're welding and fabricating or whether they're doing the electronics. We don't do any machining. That is all subcontracted out. We do all of our own R&D. That's one side of the business I'm incredibly passionate about. And we have a very strong, what I call, technical team, and I head that. And then we have, a sales function, we have a quality function, we have a purchasing function, and an accounting function. So, we manufacture a lot of systems. If we work hard at it on a single day's production, if it's one line of product, we can produce 250 a day if we have to. If we've got all the sub-assemblies done. So, yes, it will be a change because the demand, will be different for customers this year, particularly UK focused, where obviously the UK market traditionally, is a significant part of our market, but it's not our biggest market. Europe's always been our biggest market, and North America and New Zealand and Australia, and we export to 43 territories.
Wow, so it really is a global business.
A global SME, I like to call it, yeah.
And as I'm listening to you talk, Jim, I'm hearing the interest and the importance of structure and detail and technical aspects to what you're doing. And I also hear a sense of kind of creativity and design that's sneaking into the conversation as well. And I'm just wondering where your heart really lies.
Well, I think my heart absolutely lies in the technical and side of the business. And that was my training. That's what I kind of set off to be as a kid through, secondary education. I wanted to design and make stuff. I didn't know it was going to be fire extinguishers. And then I managed to be very fortunate to combine that with my number one passion with motorsport. I believe I'm a good conceptual thinker. I can visualize, I can come up with some interesting concepts. I've proven that with the IP that we own. I believe I'm quite strong at that. Structure, I wouldn't say I'm too strong at, but I think, people are probably aware that there is a fellow Sports 2000 competitor, John Eiley, is a non-executive director of Lifeline. And John and I have worked together for a number of years, and I brought John into Lifeline, A, because he's a really nice guy, but B, he has an incredible way of pushing our abilities, making us think outside of the box, looking at regulation and performance. John is incredible at extracting performance, and I think that harks back to my earlier comments where I always visualize the business as a car. And I think that's really important, that we have a racing car and you're trying to optimize it, make it better and make it faster all of the time. And that's the way I try and conceptualize the business, but with a very, very heavy bias, probably a too heavy bias towards R&D, but that's the bit that I enjoy.
Well, I think you're really giving us a sense of your passion around racing cars right from the childhood till the present day. Looking into the future, Jim, if you could drive any race car of your choosing, what would spring to mind?
Well, I think I probably have two. So I think to race would be Group A BMW, sort of Steve Soper, Roberto Ragvalia type car, that sort of iconic British touring car, German touring car. But then probably to own and perhaps drive and not race would be a Porsche 917.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And if you were racing at a particular circuit, what's your favourite?
Spa.
What do you enjoy about Spa?
Just the flow of it. It's it's fast and it's a challenge, and I think the driver input makes all the difference around there. I'd love that circuit. But a very close second to that would be Portimao in Portugal. I think that's a phenomenal circuit as well. Particularly, it's a bit like Caldwell Park on steroids. It's up and down, and you're looking at the sky, and the corners are blind. That's a really good track.
It's funny how many of the people that I've interviewed have said Spa is their favourite circuit. So it must have something special that really, captures the interest of drivers.
I've only ever driven Spa in the wet as well, which is probably more of a challenge. But again, that was in the little Gulf. But it went really well around there with front wheel drive, so it had lots of good turning and it was quite pointy. So it was very competitive around there.
In terms of then thinking about any of the Sports 2000 drivers that want to make sure that they're getting in line for one of your fire extinguishers as the regulations change, how can they find out more about Lifeline? Where should they go and look on the internet? Or
our website, which is lifeline-fire.co.uk. We have all of the information on there. And I think that most of the competitors are aware that we are offering an offer to all registered Sports 2000 drivers with some discount on our products, including safety harnesses as well.
And it sounds like from what you were saying that with demand likely to be ramping up in the new year, that people should be in touch with you fairly quickly.
I would always say that, because it's like motorsport is organised chaos. So, it's not just club races. It's the very best, not very well planned. And we can get a call from, I won't name the customer, but we have one very good UK-based customer who makes rally cars, and they can phone us up and say, we need an extinguisher tomorrow. And it's like, well, why the car's going to Africa on the day after? And it's like, well, did you not know you were building a car? So yeah, always get in early. I mean, earlier the better. At the moment, we're able to dispatch from stock, so it's quite good.
Oh, lovely. Well, it's been really fascinating to speak to you, Jim. I think safety is obviously a critical part of the whole driving experience for anybody competing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's good to know how much focus and R&D is going into developing things into the future as well.
Yeah, no, we have a huge focus on that. We like to think we're sort of 2 or 3 steps in front of, not necessarily regulation, but in terms of our opposition, in terms of our competitor companies. The big area now we're working on now is obviously electrification, which we've been working on for 2 years. And we have a dedicated test facility for that, where we can conduct some relatively small, but not single cell, but up to 180 cell tests. And we're gaining a lot of knowledge in that area now, because that is obviously the future. And the other area we've been doing a lot of work on, particularly for the FIA in the last 6 months, is biofuels, because obviously the sport is changing. World Rally Cars next year start with a biofuel. The WEC series has a biofuel. And I'm sure that will start to filter down into club racing very, very soon. And
how does that impact on what you're doing then, Jim, when you say you're working with them?
So the FIA came to us. They commercially struck a deal with a biofuel company in Germany to run in World Rally 1 at Monte Carlo Rally. And the safety department, who we work closely with, the FIA, said, could you test this for us? And of course, they sent us some fuel and we tested it, but it's a very different characteristic purely because of the bio element. There's quite a lot of methanol in there. So it does change it somewhat. And I'm pleased to say, as a result of that initial testing that we started back in June, July, we've just homologated a product primarily for WRC, and every WRC car that starts Monte Carlo in January will have one of these new extinguishers in it.
Wow. The world's ever changing.
Yeah, no, it is ever changing, but the sport is ever changing and ever developing, ever evolving. I like to think that Lifeline, follows that. We have a roadmap to the future. The FIA has a roadmap. The industry has a roadmap. So, we try and follow that as closely as we can.
You mentioned there, Jim, that Lifeline are also offering harnesses to Sports 2000 competitors. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is a relatively new product for Lifeline, and we are manufacturing, but we decided 3.5 years ago that we would start to look at harnesses as a Lifeline product. There was a new FIA regulation which kind of tidied up some of the stuff that had been going on with harnesses. So we decided that we would design and develop our own harness system in line with the latest FIA standard, and that's what we've done. We are genuinely manufacturing them here. We're not buying in a branded harness and sticking a Lifeline badge on it. We are cut and stitching here, which was a whole new process for me because I'm used to, cutting bits of metal or machining and stuff like that. So we have a sewing room. We're manufacturing our own buckles, some very, very, very tight quality systems behind that because it is the first line of defense in an accident. And we started actively manufacturing those just over 12 months ago and had a really successful first year with them. So I've obviously extended that same level of discount to the Sports 2000 Club.
Well, it's great to hear all the work that you're doing, Jim. I wish you every success with the business as it goes forward and continues to develop. And also, I think, thank you for your support for the Sports 2000 series.
No, thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from Jim Morris. And make sure you hop over to their website at lifeline-fire.co.uk to take advantage of the discount that they're offering Sports 2000 competitors this season. Remember, you can get more details about the Sports 2000 Championship and all the drivers who compete in it at the Sports 2000 website, sports2000.co.uk. And if you look there, you'll be able to listen to all the other episodes that we've recorded with drivers, sponsors and officials who are all part of the Sports 2000 family. Coming up in the next episode, I'll be talking to Rob Whitwell, who's in the middle of his season racing in the Sports 2000 category in Australia. I hope you can join me then.